Up for this evening. Again, I would encourage you to please come back tomorrow night because we're going to talk about some things that are going to be very important to you. You're going to need to know these things when you're evangelizing. We're going to talk about transition visits. We're going to talk about compassion cards. We're going to have a topic tomorrow evening that's going to be really good for new converts. And so if you're a new convert, you're going to want to be here for that. But it's going to be good for all of us because it's going to be something that you need to teach new converts, something they need to know when you're studying with them. They need to know what to expect is going to happen after they're baptized. So tomorrow night we'll look at that. If the invitation song, if you take your song book out and mark it, Brother Massey's going to lead us in the invitation song when we're done. It's going to be number 454. Number 454. If you want to mark that in your song books. Number 454. And after you mark that, if you would, turn over to number 397. Number 397, Let the Lower Lights Be Burning. Anybody know this song? Let the Lower Lights Be Burning? All right, let's give this a go. Maybe my voice holds out, maybe it don't. If it don't, y'all just keep going. Let's look at number 397. Brightly beams our Father's mercy from His lighthouse evermore. But to us He gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. Dark the night of sin has settled, loud the angry billows roar. Eager eyes are watching, longing for the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. Trim your feeble lamp, my brother. Some poor sailor tempest tossed, trying now to make the harbor in the darkness may be lost. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the wave. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 15, the Apostle Paul said, I will pray with the Spirit, and I will pray with understanding. But he also says, I'll sing with the Spirit, and I'll sing with understanding. And I wonder sometimes how much we really understand when we're singing. How many times do we just sing a song? We know it. We've heard it our whole lives. We've got it memorized, and we sing it, and we never think about the words of that song. Back in 1868, I think it was, 1869, sometime right around that time frame, there was a ship on Lake Erie, up on the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, and they're coming into the Cleveland Harbor. And the Cleveland Harbor is it's kind of a narrow harbor. Now, we were up there a few months ago, and we stopped and looked at it, and they've fixed it up some, but back in the 1800s, now there's two lighthouses. Back then, there was only one lighthouse, and it was a narrow channel coming in, and there were a lot of rocks in the harbor, so it was very dangerous to come in there on a good night. It was really dangerous to come in there on a stormy night. So this particular night, there's a ship coming in, and they're approaching the harbor. Now, there's a lighthouse there, right? And we all understand that analogy between Jesus and the lighthouse, right? If you're getting pounded by the storms of life, if you can get to Jesus, you can find shelter from those storms. And it's just like a lighthouse, if you can get into a harbor where this lighthouse is at, you're blocked from the storms just pounding you. But there's also lower lights that go out from the lighthouse. And I didn't know this till a few years ago. there's these lower lights that go out, and what they do, the lighthouse keeper lights the lighthouse, and then he lights the lower lights. And these lower lights, just like we sang, they send a gleam out across the water. So when you're coming in a ship, you're watching these gleams, and if there's a dark spot in the gleam where the gleam's interrupted, you know there's rocks right there. And so those gleams will guide you to the lighthouse, and it keeps you from running aground on the rocks. So this one night, it's storming. I mean, the winds are pounding, the waves are pounding, the wind's blowing. It's a dark, treacherous night to be out on the sea, or out on this lake. And this ship's coming out, and they got about 200 people on board. And they're coming in, and the lighthouse keeper, for some reason, he lit the lighthouse, but he didn't light the lower lights. And so it's recorded that the captain of the ship said to the pilot, he said, "Are you sure this is the Cleveland Harbor?" And the pilot said, "Yes, sir, I'm sure of it." And he said, "But where's the lower lights?" And the pilot said, "I don't know, sir." And then the captain said this, he said, "Are you sure we can make it?" And the pilot said, "We must, sir, or we'll perish." And a few minutes later, they crashed on some rocks, and over 200 people died that night. They all died. Everybody on the ship died because one man didn't do his job. So there was an evangelist a couple of years later named D.L. Moody, and he's traveling around that area, and he's doing some seminars and some gospel meetings, and he's talking about this in his lesson. He's talking about the ship and tying that back to evangelism. And there was a young guy in the audience named Philip Bliss, and Philip Bliss said, "Man, it's just like a ton of bricks hit him." He said, "Bliss, he's talking to you. You haven't been letting your lower light shine." And in 1871, Philip Bliss penned the words to this song. "Brightly beams our Father's mercy from his lighthouse evermore." Listen, Christ is always going to do what he's supposed to do. He's always going to be there shining that light. But look at the next line of that song. "But to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore." Jesus is right there where he's supposed to be, but it's up to you and I to guide people to him. It's very, very difficult for someone to find him on their own. I'm not saying it can't be done, but when you think about that, we're losing over 18,000 members of the church every single year. We're not going to overturn that by the few that find their own way to Christ. We've got to be the ones taking that message to them. Look at the next verse. He says, "Dark the night of sin is settled, loud the angry billows roar. Eager eyes are watching. They're longing for the lights along the shore." We talked about it a while ago. All the addictions in this world, the suicide rate. Why? Because they're sinking. They're getting beat up by the storms of life, and they don't even know how to comprehend. They don't know how to deal with it. And so they turn to all these different vices, trying to figure out how to deal with it when it's Jesus that can help them. But somebody's got to lead them to him. Trim your feeble lamp, my brother. You ever use an old oil lamp or even a candle? I mean, for that, when the wick starts getting long, you got to trim it. And when you trim it, what happens? The light brightens up, right? He says, trim your feeble lamp. Some of us have been sitting in the pews for a few years, and our light's gotten pretty dim. I mean, it's just that this close to going out. It's almost burnt out. I love new converts because their lights are bright. They shine bright. Boy, they're ready to share the gospel with their friends, their family, because they understand how different their life is once they become a Christian. And if we give it just enough time, we can put their lights out for them because we don't do anything. We've got to trim our lamps. He says, trim your lamp. Why? Because he said there's some sailor out there that's trying to reach the harbor, and they're going to be lost if you don't share it with them. Let the lower lights be burning. Send a gleam across the wave because there's people out there that need to be saved. Brothers and sisters, make no mistake about it. It's up to you and I. That's our job. It's our mission. If we don't do it, they're going to be lost eternally, separated from God. Turn with me over to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. We're talking about evangelism. We're talking about, when you go to the very first part of that model that we looked at, the very first thing is contacts. And that's the most important part of that model. You know, some people would say, well, surely baptism is more important than contacts. Surely Bible studies are more important than contacts. No, they're not. Because if you don't have contacts, who are you going to study with? If you don't have contacts, who are you going to baptize? You got to have contacts. But what happens is we start picking our way out of all the contacts because we start trying to pre-qualify people. And we try to take a skill that we don't have, and we try to say, well, we can determine who will or who won't be a good candidate for the gospel. And I'm as guilty as anybody. I spent a huge chunk of my life doing that. Boy, so-and-so over here's got beer cans piled plumb to the top of the fence in the backyard. There's no way he would ever become a Christian. I'm not even going to mess with him. And oh, so-and-so over here, man, she cusses like a sailor. There's no way that she's ever going to become a Christian. And oh, so-and-so over here is in the casino every single week. They're never going to become a Christian. And we'll sit there and we'll pick our way out of any contacts. We'll figure out some reason why nobody wants to hear the gospel. And then we say, well, I want to teach, but I don't have no one to teach. I don't know anybody. Well, baloney, you do too. How many of you own one of these? A cell phone? They got a button you can push in here. This one, I'm assuming the Androids do. I got an iPhone here, and it's got a button I can push that says contacts. And when I look in there, guess what there is? 1,296 contacts in my phone. Are they all Christians? I highly doubt it. If you don't think you know somebody that's lost, get in your phone. You got them in your contact section. We have got to reach out to people. We've got to quit pre-qualifying people. We've got to quit thinking that we have the ability to know who would and who wouldn't respond to the gospel. We don't have that knowledge. And I want to prove that to you looking at Matthew chapter 22. Let's look at it. Again, Jesus answered and spoke to them by parables and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son, and he sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Just by show of hands, how many of you have ever been invited to a royal wedding, like for a king, a foreign king, or even a president or something like that? How many of you? Just go ahead and raise your hands. No, we don't get invited to that. But I can guarantee you, Steve, if I ever get an invite to a royal wedding, I'm gonna call you first and let you know what happened. I want you to announce it to the congregation. If I get invited, I'm going. There is no way. Can you imagine the fanfare and the expense and the grandeur that would go into a wedding feast for the son of a king? It would be amazing. Why would we not go to that? Why would somebody reject that? But he says they were invited, and he said the people they invited were not willing to come. What in the world? Why would they not be willing to come? Well, look again in verse 4. He sent out other servants, and he said, tell those who are invited, see, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle are killed. All things are ready. Come to the wedding. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his farm and another to his business, and the rest seized the servants and treated them spitefully and killed them. Now, we know what Jesus is doing in this parable. He's talking about the Jewish nation, right? He's talking about the way they had treated the prophets. They killed the prophets. They despised the prophets. They didn't want to hear what the prophets had to say. And now they're fixing to do the exact same thing to Jesus now that he's here. So this is what he's alluding to. You know that 15 times, from John chapter 5 to John chapter 20, 15 times Jesus uses the word sent. He says he was sent, the Father sent him, sent. We see it 15 times. Well, who did he send? Did he send the preacher? Well, yeah, the preacher's going to be involved in evangelism. But I'm going to tell you something. If you're putting it on the back of your preacher, the congregation's not going to grow, and that's nothing against him. He's a great preacher. But he's got a million other things. Let me ask you this. How many of you, by show of hands, have put together, brother, how long have you been here at this congregation? How long have you been preaching? 30 years, okay. 30 years. How many of you have put together 2 Bible classes a week and 2 lessons a week for 30 years? Do you have any idea how much time that takes? I know some of you may have given a lesson or something, and you say, well, I put that together in just a few hours. Yeah, because it's one lesson. Try coming up with topics every single week, week in and week out, teaching Bible classes, giving lessons. It takes a lot of time to do what he does. And then all the other things that you want him to do as a preacher, visiting the sick, putting together the bulletin, this, that, and other. You cannot put evangelism on the back of your preacher. 1, it's not fair, and 2, it's not scriptural. He's going to be a big part of it, but you cannot expect him to grow this congregation. That's not his job. His job is to stand up here and teach you what this book says. His job is to bring you sound lessons and make sure that you have the knowledge so that you can go out and teach this. Don't put that all on your preacher. Well, let me ask you this. Did he send the elders? Sure, the elders are going to be a part of it. Your elders are going to be huge. In fact, I was talking to Dan Winkler at Polishing the Pulpit last summer in Branson, and he said, what's one of the defining factors you see that determines if a congregation is going to be successful or not successful at evangelism? And I said, well, there's a few, but the number one, I think, from my vantage point, the number one is the eldership. If the elders are not on board, the congregation's not going to grow. Why? Because they're going to say that's the preacher's job. But if the elders lead by example, if the elders are filling out compassion cards, if the elders are doing Bible studies, if the elders are making transition visits, guess what? Everybody else is going to get on board with it too. The elders have got to lead the charge. But you cannot put it all on the back of your elders. Most people I have found in the church, and I didn't know this till I became an elder, most people have no clue how busy the elders are behind the scenes. They're working day in and day out, night in, night out, doing stuff you don't even know about that they're busy doing, visiting sick people, sitting with people as they're dying, with their family members, going here, going there, trying to put out fires, trying to keep make sure we got the right curriculum and the curriculum sound. And they have a million things going on. You cannot put evangelism on the back of your elders. Again, they got to be a part of it, but you can't put it all on them. It's not scriptural and it's not fair. What about missionaries? Did he send missionaries? Well, sure he sent missionaries. Look, I've been to, I think Jamie and I have been to right around 40 congregations this year that we've gone and visited. And almost every congregation we go to are great supporters of foreign missionary works. And I love that. In fact, we go down to the Whitakers and us and some others. We go down to Jamaica and do some work. And, and I know people that are traveling all over the world. Justin Hopkins, if you know him, they do great work in Tanzania and Uganda and Kenya. They do great work. I love missionaries, and I love what they're doing. I love that the church is thriving in Africa right now. Justin told me a few weeks ago that people will literally run barefoot down a dirt road trying to chase them down to hear the gospel when they're in town. They want it. They're craving it down there. I love that India is growing and the church is thriving in India more than it ever has. It's still relatively small, but it's growing more than it ever has in India. I love to hear about Jamaica and all the work going on in Jamaica. I love that. But what about the United States? What about West Fayetteville Church of Christ? And what about the community of Fayetteville? Do we not need to evangelize right here? We got a mission field right here. We read a while ago when he said that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. You understand what he's saying? It's not that the harvest is the problem. He doesn't say nobody wants to hear the word. He says the laborers are the problem. He says pray that the Lord will send laborers out into the harvest. We got to pray that the Lord will send laborers, and then we've got to be the answer to that prayer because he will not send people to do the work for us. We've got to do the work. What about members? Did he send members? You better believe it. The membership is the engine of evangelism. Brothers and sisters, if you're not involved in evangelism, the church will not grow. It'll just barely grow. It'll trickle by. But the membership has got to be engaged. Why? Because you know people that your preacher doesn't know. You know people that your elders don't know. You know people, you have your own circle of friends, you have your co-workers, you have your relatives, and no one else knows those people. We need you to be involved. We need you bringing their names. We need you filling out compassion cards. We need you helping us to reach out to them and to lead them to Christ. The whole church has. This is the reason we call it congregational evangelism. You can't expect one or two people to grow a church. It takes a whole church to grow the church. And that's what we saw in the first century. But look what happened in verse 6. It says, and the rest seized his servants, treated him spitefully, and killed him. But when the king heard about it, verse 7, he was furious. And he sent out his armies and destroyed those murderers and burned up their cities. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Now let's wrap our minds around that for a minute. Why would they not be worthy? He just invited them, and now he's saying they're not worthy? Why would he say that? He's saying they're not worthy because they rejected the invitation. It boggles my mind how many people reject the invitation of our Lord and somehow think that they're going to have a seat at the table. You don't make it into heaven by rejecting the invitation of the Lord. And that's what these people did. He says you can't reject the invitation. It will cause you to be eternally separated from God. You have got to respond scripturally to the invitation that he's put out. But then in verse 8 it says, or verse 9 it says, therefore go into the highways and as many as you find invite to the wedding. Look at verse 10 with me. I want you to follow along with me in verse 10. It's very important. So the servants went out into the highways and they gathered together all the good that they found, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Is that what it said? No, it said the bad and the good. They didn't just go looking for the low-hanging fruit. I mean, they said they're going out for the good and the bad. What the good? Who were the good? Let's start with the good. The good were the low-hanging fruit. The good were, they should have been the easy ones. Matthew chapter 10 tells us this is the lost sheep of the household of Israel. This is the religious folks. We talked about in that last lesson about reaching out to religious people. This is the religious people. I'm going to tell you something. I used to be one of those that would kind of, I was a little standoffish when it came to trying to convert somebody out of a denomination because I thought you couldn't do it. We have baptized almost 50 people in the last 4 years out of denominations. From the Baptist church. Last year we converted a Baptist youth minister. We've converted out of the Wesleyan church. We've converted out of the Church of God. We've converted out of the Assembly of God. We've converted out of the Catholic Church. We're working on a Mormon right now. We've converted a Buddhist. We've converted, you name it, we've converted out all kinds of places. Well, how is that possible? I said earlier, raise your hand if you're a member of a denomination before you came to the church. Did you worship at a denomination? And several of you raised your hands. And I'm going to tell you something that those people that raise their hands, they'll be able to confirm this. I'm going to tell you something about people in denominations that we may or may not know this is true, but I'm telling you it's true. Most people, not all, most people in denominations love God just as much as you love God. And I guarantee you the people that are sitting in here right now that came out of a denomination when they were in that denomination loved God just as much as you love God. They wanted to be in heaven just as much as you want to be in heaven. They just didn't know the truth. They hadn't been shown the truth yet. Paul describes them like this. He says they have a zeal for God, but it's not according to knowledge. I wish sometimes we were half as zealous for God as the Jehovah's Witnesses are. As some of these other people that are knocking on doors every week, and they're going out and they're standing in parking lots and they're handing out Bibles and they're trying to teach. They have no idea what they're teaching. They're completely wrong in their teaching, but the zeal is there. What would the church be like if we were that zealous for God? All these people that we converted that came out of denominations, I asked them this before we started the study. I said, if you see something in this study that we're going to do, and you see it in its proper context, you read it with your own eyes, and it's different from what you believe, are you willing to change what you believe? Are you willing to align your beliefs with what the Scriptures say? Yeah, I'll do that. If they say yes, you better warm the baptistry up. You're going to have a baptism. Some people are not. Some people, we had one of our members, he studied with a lady, and he said, she was arguing about baptism. He said, just go to Acts chapter 2, verse 38. She said, that's not in my Bible. He said, yes, it is. She said, no, it's not. I'll rip that page out. She literally had ripped the page. She didn't want to look at it. So she ripped it out of her Bible. That's a dishonest heart. I'm going to tell you something about this book right here. The Word of God will divide the honest heart from the dishonest heart. But if those people in those denominations have an honest heart, you'll convert them. If our Lord could create this world, can He not convert the heart of a sinner? You don't have to do it. You don't have the power to do it. All you have to do is facilitate the study. Let this Bible do what it does. Let the Bible speak, and it will convert the hearts of sinners. And we do it all the time. So that's the good. He says, go after the good. Folks, do not be scared. Do not be nervous to go talk to somebody that you know that's in a denomination. You will be shocked how many of them you'll convert to the church. But he also said, go after the bad, didn't he? He said, go call the bad and the good. Now, the bad, that comes from the Greek word porneros. It's where, it's talking about the sexually immoral, the wicked, the morally depraved, the evil, the worst of the worst. Go after them. Because I'm going to tell you something. I don't know a lot of people that were worse than Saul before he became Paul. He stood right there and held the coats of the men that stoned Stephen to death, a great gospel preacher, and he held their coats and watched it happen. He was throwing Christians in jail. He was on his way to Damascus to drag people back for being Christians. He had papers in his hand when he encountered Christ on the road to Damascus. He was a persecutor of Christians and became one of the best soldiers for the cross that ever lived on this earth. I've known people that were just as wicked and evil as you could ever imagine, and they make some of the very best Christians when they're finally converted. Don't shy away from people because they're past. God has the power to remove them from that. God has the power to save them, to redeem them of those sins. Doesn't matter what your past was. That doesn't matter. I don't care how wicked or evil you may have been in your life. That does not matter. That does not define you. You can change your mind right now today and say, that's who I was, but that's not who I am anymore. And from now on, I'm going to live my life for Christ. He says, go after those people. This one couple we were studying with, she was a Baptist and he was a Buddhist. They were from Laos. And they'd come down from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we're studying with them, and we're talking about this subject. And I made the comment, I said, you ever hear of Jeffrey Dahmer? Oh, yeah, they knew. And you know the story about Jeffrey Dahmer. He was converted by a Church of Christ preacher, went and visited with him and converted him, and he became a member of the church when he was in prison. I'm telling him this, and this guy's uncle, it turned out, was one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. What is the chances of that happening? And he said to me, he said, Keno, this is my problem. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered my uncle. He said, how could I ever love a God that would forgive somebody for doing that? And I just had to take him to the cross and show him how God forgave the very people that killed his son. 2 weeks later, we ended up baptizing James. He became a Christian, he and his wife both. I don't care how removed somebody is from God right now. The gospel message has the power to convert people. It has the power to remove people from their sins and turn them into great soldiers of the cross if they're ready, if their heart is honest. If their heart is not honest, then there's nothing we can do about it. Not right now, but that might change later on. I had one guy I studied with. They came over. Well, first of all, we tried to study with him for quite a while, he and his wife. And we tried to study with them for a while, and they didn't have any interest in it. We just couldn't get them into a Bible study. So then all of a sudden, one night, Cardell, he's 33 years old, and he has a heart attack and dies in his sleep. He's laying next to his wife, and he makes some noise. She wakes up, and he's gone. No pulse, no breathing. He's dead. So she starts doing CPR, and they have a roommate, and they call this roommate. She says, call 911. He calls the ambulance, and the IMSA, the ambulance gets there, and they get in there, and they shock him. He's out. He's got nothing. They get the defibrillator. They shock him, and they get no response. They shock him again. They get no response. They shock him again. They get no response. The ambulance person told Marissa later, said 3 times, if you don't get somebody back in 3 times, you're not going to get them back. But for some reason, they shocked him a 4th time, and they got him back. And so they take off, they load him in the ambulance, they're headed to the hospital. He dies in the ambulance, headed to the hospital. They shock him again and get him back. They're pulling underneath the awning at St. Francis Hospital, and he dies again in the ambulance. They shock him and they get him back. They rush him in, he has heart surgery. They end up putting a pacemaker and a defibrillator in there and everything. He gets out. Now all of a sudden, he's ready to talk about the Bible. Usually when someone's ready, it's after they've had a life-changing event. You don't get much bigger of a life-changing event than dying 4 or 5 times, right? So now he's ready. So he comes over and we study. And I didn't know this before I'd even met Rob Whitaker. I just heard out about Back to the Bible. So we were just one of the first times we used it. But I didn't know how to use it. And so we're having a Bible study with him, and I'm answering all of his questions, as any good preacher will do. Preachers want to answer questions. We want people to know that we got the answer to their questions. And so I'm answering all the questions about ghosts and his dead grandma that comes and visits him and all. I'm just going down all these rabbit trails. And we spend 3.5 hours on a study that should have took an hour. And they leave, and that's it. I don't see them no more. I never get them back for lesson 2. We never get to talk about the Church of Christ. We never get to talk about salvation. I lost the study. That just drove me crazy that I let that happen, especially once Rob came and taught me how to evangelize. It just drove me out of my mind to think that I let this go, that I let them do this, lead me down these rabbit trails, and I fell for it, and they ended up falling away, and they never finished the study. They never came to Christ. 4 years later, I get a text message. In fact, it was this past December. I get a text message from Marissa. Now their son is 14 years old at this time, right? And she says, hey, Keno, you remember that study we did that time? And I said, yeah, I remember that. And she goes, can we do that again? I said, you better believe it. And I invited them over. We had a meal, and we just started all over lesson 1. But now I'm ready for them, right? So we start into the study, and we don't get, I kid you not, we're not on page 2 of this study. And she goes, oh, by the way, Keno, I had a question about you. I've been studying Revelation. Why does everybody always go to Revelation? I don't know why everybody wants to start on Revelation and get on YouTube, but everybody does. I said, Marissa, that's an interesting topic. She said, I want to ask you a question about the mark of the beast, what that means. I said, that's an interesting subject. If you'll write that down, let's get through this study. Let's give you some information that you're going to need to help you better understand it, and then we'll go and we'll talk about that, and then I'll explain it to you later on. She agrees to that. We go through lesson 1. We go through lesson 2. We get to lesson 3. In lesson 3, we're talking, and right when we first come into the study, she says, Keno, I just want you to know. Now, listen, their 14-year-old son's in on the study this time, right? So it's Cardell, Marissa, and Jaden. So she said, I want to tell you something before we get started tonight, Keno. We know that we need to be baptized. I was like, this is going to be the easiest study I've ever done. She said, but we want Pastor Dan to do it at our church. They go to a big mega church, like 3,000 people. We want Pastor Dan to do it. I said, I'm sure Pastor Dan would love to do that. I'm not going to lose a Bible study over this, right? I said, I'm sure he would love to do that. Because we haven't even talked about salvation yet. Tonight's the night to talk about salvation. I know what they're going to do when we get to that part. So we go through lesson 3, and we get all the way through all the steps of salvation. We get to baptism, and she lays her pen down and looks at Cardell, and he looks at her, and she goes, we got to get baptized. And he said, right now. And we got up, and we went into the baptistry, and I baptized all 3 of them, and they became members of the church. I don't care what someone's past has been, they'll come to Christ if they have an honest heart. He says, go after the good and go after the bad. Now look at verse 11. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there was a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. So he said to him, friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment on? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot and take him away and cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. What in the world just happened? You're going to cast somebody into outer darkness because they didn't have a wedding garment on? Well, if you understand, there's several places you could look at, but one of them is 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 22, that you can see that when a king would put something like this together, he would provide them with the garments. He would give them what they needed to wear. So, if you come to a wedding for a king, the king's going to give you the wedding garment. All you got to do is change. He's giving you what you need. All you have to do is change. You ever hear that saying, you can come as you are, but you can't stay as you are, right? It doesn't matter how sinful we are. It doesn't matter what our life was before. We can come to Christ in any condition, but now we got to change our lives. Now we got to start growing. It doesn't happen overnight. A new convert is not going to go down in the waters of baptism, come up, and 5 minutes later, they're never sinning again. They're done with their addictions. They're done with their vices. They're going to be, perfect from now on. That's not the way it works. It's a process of growing and maturing. But there needs to be growth and there needs to be maturing, right? You got to move on. You got to grow. You cannot sit in a pew for 20 or 30 years and be no further ahead in Christ than you were the day you came to him. You cannot sit in a pew, for your whole adult life and you have no more knowledge than the day you were baptized. You're still dabbling your feet out into the world. You can't do that. You got to change. This man the king gave him what he needed to change, but he refused to change. And that will cost you your soul. That's why he was cast into outer darkness. Brothers and sisters, we got to continually be growing. We got to be progressive. We got to be growing in Christ. So a new convert, they're going to start out and they're going to be right here, but they're going to continue. We're going to see that growth in them. And pretty soon they're not going to be doing those things they used to do anymore. And we're going to help them to do that. We're going to be there to support them. We're going to be there to mentor them. And brothers and sisters, if you've been in the pew for a number of years and you're still dabbling your feet out into the world, you got to fix that. You got to correct that now. Don't wait a second longer. Fix it now because that could cost you your soul. Look at verse 14. For many are called, but few are chosen. Why can't I pre-qualify somebody? Why can't I decide if somebody's going to be a good candidate for the gospel or not? Because I don't have that knowledge. And you don't have that knowledge either. But here's what I'm going to tell you. If you want to grow this congregation, you got to get that 1,000 contacts a year. And it's easy to do if you guys as members if you'll step up and you'll write down 10 names of people you know that are separated from Christ, and if you'll bring those names for your friends and your family, if you'll do that, you'll have your 1,000 contacts. But he says, many are called, but few are chosen. If we get just a few contacts, then we're not going to get any baptisms. We're not going to have any conversions. It takes the many to get to the few. Look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. He says, wide is the path that leads to destruction, and many people are going to be on it. Listen, we know most people aren't going to come to God. That's not a big news flash. I mean, maybe that was a spoiler for you. I'm sorry if it was, but you need to know, most people are not going to come to God, but some of them will. How are you going to get to the ones that will? You got to go to everybody. You got to go to the many to get the few. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, many will say to me, or he said, not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. And he says there's going to be some people in that day that's going to say, Lord, Lord, didn't I prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many wonderful works in your name? And I'm going to say, depart from me, you that work lawlessness. We don't know who's going to come to Christ and who's not. We have no way. I don't care how smart you are in the Bible. I don't care how many degrees you have stacked up behind your name. None of us know who will and who won't respond to the gospel. We know only a few are going to do it, but we don't know how to get to those few. The only way we get those few, we got to go to the many. If you want to grow this congregation, you got to get those contacts. You got to come up with those names. Otherwise, the congregation will not grow. You'll end up dying in a few years. You'll end up over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, there'll be 4 or 5 members. I've seen it. I can't count how many congregations. I was in a congregation 2 weeks ago in Indianapolis, 300 people down to 36 people. I know a congregation in North Texas from 250 people to 14 people. We see it all over the place that congregations are shutting their doors down. The only way we change that, we got to bring those names. We got to get busy as a congregation, and you cannot expect your person sitting on the other end of the pew to be the one to do it. You have to get involved because you're going to stand before Christ on the great day of judgment, and you're going to have to answer for your deeds, good or bad. Every one of us are going to hear from Jesus saying, what did you do to lead people to me? What did you do to reach out to lost people? Oh, I didn't do nothing. I thought that was optional. No, it's not optional. It's a divine mandate. We are all going to be held accountable to that. And if we think we could put that off on somebody else because we don't want to mess with it, I hate to tell you, but I would not want to be in the shoes of that person on the day of judgment. I promise you, I'm going to do everything in my power to lead as many people as I can to Christ, because I do not want to stand in front of Jesus and have him ask me, why did the church die on your watch? Why did the church die whenever you guys were here? It thrived all through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and now when you come along, all of a sudden the church dies? Why is that the case? I'm not answering that, and I hope you won't either. We got to get serious about evangelism. You've been doing a good job. I'm not knocking you. You've been doing a good job, but you can do a lot more. You can do a whole lot more. And if we'll make that commitment and get busy, we'll start growing the church, not only here, but in other areas as well. You got to know that you're going to be held accountable for this, folks. God gave you the talent to do it. Can you come up with a name? Can you write a card? Can you go out and do a transition visit? Can you help a new convert? Can you send out some text messages to encourage somebody that's become a convert recently? Can you teach a class? Can you do a Bible study? Can you launder the baptismal garments? Can you take care of the baptistry? I've been into some congregations, the baptistry looks like a farm pond. There's lily pads in there. That baptistry hasn't been used in 100 years. I've been in some congregations, the baptistry is bone dry and it's got boxes and mops and brooms stored in it. Somebody needs to take care of that and make sure it's ready to go when we're ready to have a baptism. Somebody's got to provide a Bible. You know that you can go to, if you buy at least 30 at a time, you can go to Apologetics Press and you can buy those Bibles, those study Bibles. And here's what we do at Coweta. We have a new convert. We'll write down, all of us will write a little short message inside the covers of that Bible and put our phone number. And then we call that new convert up, because most baptisms aren't happening on a Sunday anymore. They're happening during the week or on a Saturday, and we record it and we play it up on the screen so all the members can rejoice in this baptism. And then we have that new convert come up and we present them with a Bible that has their name on it, and on the insides, all these phone numbers of all the members. And we tell them, the very first thing that happened to Jesus after he was baptized, he was tempted. He was led into the wilderness and was tempted. And you've never been on Satan's radar, but now you're smack dab in the middle of it. Satan is going to come after you like you have never thought possible. And you're going to truck along 2 or 3 months, and all of a sudden, it's going to seem like your world is falling apart. And you're going to think, why in the world did I become a Christian? I didn't have all these problems before I was a Christian. And you got to know that Satan doing that to you. And when you're tempted to pick up that bottle, when you're tempted to smoke that joint, when you're tempted to go to the casino, when you're tempted to get on websites you shouldn't be on, pick this Bible up and start calling these phone numbers until somebody answers day or night. And we're going to talk you through it. We're going to have you over to the house, or we're going to come to your house if need be, or we're going to stay on the phone with you until you're past that temptation. And that's how we help new Christians to grow in Christ. Somebody's got to help do all that stuff. Somebody has got to do that. You're the ones that Jesus called to do that. You're the ones, you signed up for this. Whenever you said to Jesus that you want to be forgiven of your sins and you confessed his name before men and you went down in the waters of baptism, you entered a covenant. Don't break that covenant because you think that it's awkward or it's out of your skill set. Jesus doesn't ask for 10 talents from a 2-talent person. If he commanded you, and make no mistake about it, he did command you. And he said in John chapter 14, verse 15, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you love Christ, then you've got to evangelize. There's no other option. You have got to be involved somewhere in that model. You don't have to do the Bible studies, but somewhere in that model, you got to find your spot and you got to help with it. If you're here tonight and you hadn't been doing that, if you think back over the last 5 years and you haven't led anybody to Christ, you haven't helped with any kind of way of leading someone to Christ, or you currently haven't even thought about it in months or years about trying to share the gospel with somebody, or somehow having a hand in it, you haven't filled out any cards, you haven't done anything, I would seriously consider asking my Lord for forgiveness tonight. And I'm going to tell you something. I have had literally elders, I've had preachers, I've had members. We were in a congregation in New York. They had 10 members in a congregation. 9 of them came forward because they realized how serious this is. There's nothing more serious out there, folks. If you're a Christian and you're not helping lead the lost to Christ, you are failing in your mission. But if you want to help and you want to be trained, I want to help you. I want to train you. Your elders want to train you. Your preacher wants to train you. We want you to be involved in evangelism. Somewhere, I promise you, there's a spot for you. And we're not asking you to do something that you have no training for. We will give you the training to where you know what you're doing. But you got to make a commitment tonight. Are we going to grow this congregation, or are we going to watch it die? You're either growing or you're dying. There's no sitting still. There's no just hovering at a certain. If you're not growing, you're dying. If you want to grow, then now's the time to make that commitment. And if you want prayers from your brothers and sisters here that love you so much and that want to help you to grow, then now's the time to do that. Come forward and we'll have a prayer for you, and we'll recenter our life. We won't be self-focused anymore. We'll be God-focused. And we'll start growing the church of Christ. And once again, we'll become the fastest growing religious body in this nation. If you want to be a part of that and you need prayers, then please come as we stand and as we sing number 454.